another thing, like why this podcast? I want to briefly talk about why we're doing this podcast, because the idea here is we try to like translate and scale something and reach more people with something that has already been happening in my life quite a lot, which is that so for a long time I've been working with people and with groups of people on personal development topics or on this theme, along this theme. And this, by the way, is another example of freedom of making a choice. So thanks to the businesses I've built and thanks to the financial means that I have been able to do some pretty unconventional things that are not necessarily the most like financially efficient things to do, but that are the things I want to do. So in order to hire people, in order to put together teams, what I have done several times is that I've done some kind of an apprenticeship thing where basically, so the first time I did this, I flew like 6 people out to Barcelona, rented apartments for everyone to live in. We were living together and working together for a period of 3 months. And that is something, that's, if you tried to just maximize the bottom line, you probably wouldn't use that way to hire people. But that's the kind of work I want to be doing. And and because of my attitude towards the purpose of making money and the purpose of my business, I can do that. And so this has been some of the most gratifying work I've ever done, is to work directly with people and to teach them skills directly. But what I noticed is that over time, for a long time after I started having some success as an entrepreneur, I was like the entrepreneur guy. I was the business guy, where people would come to me with business questions. I would have discussions about entrepreneurship with everyone, that was the thing. But without me really trying to do that, this over time drifted more towards like life. I was talking more about life than about entrepreneurship. And I noticed that even when I did an apprenticeship where people got together with the express purpose of learning digital marketing skills, like the main value, they got a lot of value out of it in terms of the digital marketing skills they learned. But the main value they got out of it was everything else, was just being shown a different approach to life and a different kind of mindset and cleaning up your way of thinking and basically generating greater clarity of thinking, having tools to like problem solving tools to apply to things like emotional distress or things like that, and also the community that formed. And it just seemed to me like it's kind of weird. I'm inviting people to learn digital marketing skills, and like 10% of the value they get is digital marketing, and 90% of the value is stuff that wasn't on the label, And more, people would come to me and ask me about things and to have conversations with me that is more about just, how to live a better life and how to be a better person rather than how to be an entrepreneur. And I noticed that the thing that we've also done with Icario, and you've been privy to this as well. There's something about getting the right kind of people in a room together and just sitting around and talking that makes magic happen. And I think that a big part of that is, I think of it as this idea of, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I think there's some merit in that idea, because if you, just as a simple example, right, if you hang around with people who are generally miserable, you're probably going to be miserable too, right? But also not just like your emotional state. Like if you hang around with people who are who have mastered the game of money, and they're they have their businesses and they're investors and all this kind of stuff, it's going to rub off on you. It's like it's going to change the way you think about money. It's going to change your behavior. It's going to change. And also opportunities are going to come, you're going to come across opportunities that you'd otherwise not become. So just by hanging out with rich people, you're probably going to increase your own net worth, right? It kind of rubs off on you. And the same is true for everything else. You hang out with super fit people, you're going to get fitter, right? And so I think that is one of the effects that we've seen, where you bring people together who are generally ambitious and growth-minded and into, fitness and self-improvement and so on and so forth. You bring them all together, you have conversations together, you do stuff together, and this thing happens where it just upgrades everyone's life.
Yeah, well, to speak of my own experience with the apprenticeship, just in confirmation of what you just said, one of the most interesting things that that was almost immediately apparent for me within the first 2 weeks was it became clear to me that I was hanging around with a couple of people who were just creative and they had projects that brought them intrinsic satisfaction to undertake and to carry out. And this was quite strange for me at the time, because before I came to Lisbon and joined the apprenticeship, I hadn't fully articulated this, but what I was pretty aimless. And for some reason, I didn't really take it seriously that some people could undertake creative projects for its own and get real satisfaction from that for its own sake. For some reason, because I'd never been around people who did that before. And within the first couple of weeks, I was hanging around with yourself, and we were hanging around with another member of the team, Jonas, who's like a filmmaker. Just totally got so much inspiration, and when he spoke about filmmaking, it totally lit up and everything like that. It's just like, wow. And straight away, initially I felt quite inadequate, because I was like, well, what's my inspiration? But as time went on, it totally rubbed off, and I now exhibit the same traits, and it's way more satisfying. So basically this is just confirmation that, yeah, the people you hang around with, they have an influence, for better or for worse.
Yeah. So this effect that we've observed is something that we're trying to scale with this podcast. Because, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to have some of those conversations on air, basically, so that, because so often we have conversations where we feel like, well, I wish more people knew about this, or like a lot of people could benefit from what just happened, right? And so that's part of what we're trying to do with the podcast, is have these conversations on air. And I think this is one of the things you can do, especially podcasts are good for this, where you can, you can't immediately switch to people you hang out with in real life. It's kind of a project to design your social circle. But you can get this kind of exposure from books and podcasts. Because I think that's also where I got it from first. Like, before I built a social circle, I was a total loner. But these positive influences and new ideas and so on came from books primarily, and later some podcasts, where I feel like I get that value as well. It just like opens my mind to new ways of thinking about things and learning things. So that is what we're trying to do. That is also, and that's why this podcast, the podcast is not the only thing we do at Icario, but the reason we're doing this podcast, we want to see if we can get that conversational magic, if that translates to a podcast. And we'll see.